these things get in there. They get in there when you're really, really young. And you may not remember being 2 years old in nursery or 1 year old or less in nursery, but you're placed in that environment and you are hearing it. And it does get in there. So when you get to be a little bit older, there's familiarity there already. I don't know of any 2 or 3 year old who's going to challenge something that an adult says.
No.
They have no sense of autonomy. They can't argue. They can't reason. They can't escape it. If you can establish just a modicum of trust and make children like you, then you can put anything in there. You start believing that when you're in that pre-K category. So now when you're an adult, you don't think twice about the fact that your entire faith hinges on the fact that a girl ate an apple given to her by a talking snake.
Welcome to Unbound,
A podcast for new atheists,
and lifetime atheists,
ex-evangelicals.
truth seekers, and free thinkers.
There is life after faith.
And life here is good. It's time for a new perspective.
And a better conversation. I'm Spider.
And I'm Shelle, and it's time to get unbound.
Oh, baby, do we have a show for you tonight. I'm Spider.
And I'm Shelle.
And this particular episode actually turned into a two-parter while I was doing research for it. The next 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about a subject that I think really, really needs to have some light shined on it. And the people who participate in the activities that we're going to talk about really needs some light shined on them. They need a few other things too, but we'll get into that a little bit later. We're going to be talking about how evangelicals target children and young people, young adults, teenagers, college and career age people, and the reasons why they are so aggressive with the way that they indoctrinate people at a younger age. This week, we're going to be talking specifically about children, and we're going to be talking about an age group that spans from birth, yes, I said birth, to about grade 5. The Assemblies of God themselves, right there in their children's ministries pages, talk about programs for children from birth to 36 months as one target group that they focus on.
Right.
When they are putting together curricula. There's Sunday school curricula for children fresh out of the womb.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the crazy things that these people do to your kids, to our kids, to any kid that they can get to listen to them, and the tactics that they use and the reasons why they target children who are so young. And there are many, many, many reasons to hit children up with indoctrination at a very, very young age. And we're going to get right into this tonight because there's so much to say. And this entire thing is another example of just a full-length Christians behaving badly kind of episode. Nothing incredibly timely here. It's all stuff that happens all the time and was happening when I was this age, because as I was doing my research for this, I was thinking to myself, you know, my evangelical influence didn't start until around age 13, but that's not true.
No.
It started much earlier than that because there was the whole thing with Open Door Chapel, which was definitely evangelical. It was run mostly by people from Tres Dias, and I've really talked them up a few times before as being one of the less toxic movements out there. But my first exposure to evangelical indoctrination as a child came from there. The Catholics weren't anywhere near as aggressive with it, although the whole thing with parochial school does also, it qualifies. But religion courses were only a part of the day. And these were things that they taught to adults also. It wasn't like they were targeting children. Of course, they had to put a slant on it so that kids could understand.
Right.
But they were a lot more basic. And they weren't anywhere near as aggressive. Religion class was less than an hour out of the day. And not to downplay it, because indoctrination is indoctrination, but at the same time, there was a difference between the way the Catholic school did it and the way that evangelicals do it. For starters, everybody's parents knew when we were in parochial school that we were going to get religious training. And it was all stuff that they believed already. the school didn't really deviate from anything that they taught in church. So if we were going to get this stuff in church, then it was pretty much understood that the parents had exposure to this stuff too, whether they were active in the church or not, they had had exposure to it. So we weren't hearing anything in school that our parents wouldn't have been privy to. And it's a much, much different situation when you're dealing with the way that evangelicals do it. And we're going to get into some of the whys and wherefores of that. But I do believe that I have mentioned before on the show about a poster that I used to see hanging on the wall in Faith Assembly that talked about how 80% of people who don't accept Christ by age 18 never will. And the Nazarene Church, actually, they focus it down a little bit more. In my research, I came across a couple of pages from Southern Nazarene University. This comes from a website, snu.edu. And an infographic that shows what they like to refer to as the 4 to 14 window.
Right.
And what that means is that you are most likely to reach people between the ages of 4 and 14. And right here on their page, it says, because the 4 to 14 age period slice of the pie is so large, many have started talking about a 4 to 14 window. Many people serving as career cross-cultural missionaries have testified that they first felt God calling them to missionary service during that 4 to 14 age period. So that age group is vital to evangelicals, and they start even earlier than that. Just like I said, the AG has curricula for children from birth to 36 months.
Right.
They know how to talk to children. They know the types of things that children are going to respond to, and they really, really, really capitalize on this. One of the first things that I noticed when I started getting more involved in evangelical religion, the first summer that I was away at Word of Life Island, I learned that there was a camp for younger children right there in Scroon Lake also. It was a separate camp for younger children called The Ranch.
Right.
And it had a more Western theme, right down to having a rodeo as part of their thing during the week. And it amazes me when I read some of the descriptions for this. I got to scroll down a little bit because my notes on this are kind of all over the place, but they sort of came together into a two-parter here. And there's a lot on children's ministry. But let's talk about The Ranch just for a second. I'm going to pull up that website, and I'm going to read to you what they say about their own camp. This is from WOL.org, stands for wordoflife.org, and this is what they say about their children's camp. At The Ranch, elementary students will begin their adventure and launch their faith. During fun-filled days of activity and biblical discovery. Nestled in the beautiful Adirondack Mountains, The Ranch is a safe and exciting place for campers to learn about God, explore their relationship with Him, and create memories that will last a lifetime. What do they not talk about here? They don't talk about swimming.
Yeah.
They don't talk about pickup volleyball games or baseball games. They don't talk about anything that's done on the water. I mean, they're on a lake. So there's nothing about boating. There's nothing about fishing. There's nothing about any of that. I mean, there's a picture on the page for The Ranch that shows some kids out on the water having a good time and playing sports and all of that. But the way that they describe their camp, it sounds, I mean, anyone reading this who is not part of that community is just going to see this as, this is our opportunity to get your kids for a week to indoctrinate them.
Right.
And that's really, I mean, you kind of have to hand it to them because they put it right out there.
They're put it right out there, but they have the picture. They have the picture, and they're going to look at the picture. They might not read all of the text.
Right.
But they're going to see the picture of kids having fun in the water.
Yeah.
And figure, oh, that's the camp.
Right. But this is a very small blurb in very big text.
Yeah.
So they want you to know this about them.
They want you to know. It's like, oh, by the way.
They want you to know that this is what's going to happen while your kids are there. What does it say again? Begin their adventure and launch their faith. They operate under the assumption, whether you're going to their kids' camp or their teen camp, they operate under the assumption that you may or may not be quote unquote saved when you show up there.
Right.
So they're willing to target every age group, but they're going to get them as young as they possibly can. And Word of Life, this is for elementary school kids. I was talking about younger children, and there's a lot that churches do to indoctrinate kids that young. Infants and toddlers, for starters, the Assemblies of God and other evangelical organizations don't do infant baptism the way that they do in the Catholic Church.
Right.
Or in a variety of other churches. What they do instead is what's called baby dedication.
Right.
And our son went through that.
Yes, he did.
He did. And I watched a lot of baby dedications over a lot of years. And of course, I thought that it was a good thing. I thought that it was better than the concept of baptizing an infant. Because when I was an infant, I was baptized into the Catholic Church. But then as an evangelical, I was told, well, no, that actually has to be your decision.
Right.
And it's something that you have to decide to do. But as an alternative, they do this thing called baby dedication. And what this entails, for anyone who hasn't seen one of these before, it's the same thing as a baptism. It's a blessing that's done on the child. But then there's this whole other aspect to it. Now, for Catholics, you would have a godparent or godparents
Right.
who would be charged with, the spiritual upbringing of the kid and maybe even the literal upbringing of this kid if something happened to their parents. It all depended on what the arrangement was. It wasn't a hard and fast thing, but it was the same type of situation. When I was confirmed in the Catholic Church,
Right.
I had a sponsor, and it was the same type of thing. She was kind of like my chosen godmother. Mm-hmm. She was also gay, which, and I knew at that point, and it was kind of empowering to me because my thoughts on this had already started to shift when I decided to actually go through confirmation. But I disagreed with a lot of what the Catholic Church had to say about a lot of things then too. So I found it kind of empowering that I had a longtime friend of our family, someone who I would always call my aunt, even though she wasn't my aunt, with her hand on my shoulder as I was being blessed by the bishop. It's like, oh, if you only knew who my sponsor was. But I was very pleased to have her there and to have her as part of that. And she's still in our life. It's really, it's a very interesting thing that's happened. Social media has been responsible for a lot of people getting back into my life that have been out for a long time. And this person has been on my friends list for years now and watched me go through all kinds of transformations and watched me awaken to the realities of what her life is and just sort of embrace her because she is who she is.
Right.
My confirmation was definitely an interesting day, and having her part of that was a big positive. So, not everything was terrible about that or any of the experiences that I had as a child or young adult. But the problem is that all of these things that I went through were constructed by other people, and I was told what to believe and how to go about expressing my beliefs and all of that. And it did. It actually started way, way younger than I give it credit for. Now, I wasn't one of these kids that was brought up evangelical and had all of this stuff pounded into me from birth on. It took a while, but there were enough influences out there softening me up to all of this, leading into my teen years, that made it very, very easy for them to slide that indoctrination right in there. So the Southern Nazarene Church wants to identify 4 to 14 as the target, but they also look at kids who are younger.
Right.
And they also look at people who are slightly older, and so do other evangelical organizations like the Assemblies of God. It starts in the nursery. So you've got your baby dedication, and you've got nursery ministry in a lot of these churches. And when you walk into a nursery that's being run during service so that the parents can be indoctrinated without distraction,
Right.
and that's really all that's there for.
It's all that's
they
there
take
for.
the kids away from the main service so that the parents don't have to worry about them, and they can just be indoctrinated for that hour and a half or however long that service is going to go on. But when you walk into that nursery, you hear all kinds of doctrine-soaked music. They have all kinds of videos playing on the screens around the classroom. I can remember pretty vividly things like Salty.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Psalty.
Yes, the
As
singing
in
songbook.
the singing songbook. Salty, the singing songbook. Then you had Adventures in Odyssey. Do you remember that one?
Vaguely.
It was more of a radio-based thing because
Right.
we used to run Adventures in Odyssey at Sound of Life.
Right.
Then there was Veggie Tales,
Yes.
which I wasn't aware of until I was a young adult. I don't think it even existed
No, it didn't.
until I was a young adult.
No, it didn't exist until we were in college. It was one of the first completely computer animated things that we had. They weren't quite as in your face about the whole Jesus thing.
No,
It
but
was-
it was
yeah,
all biblically
but it was
based.
all biblically based.
And it was all framed in a very positive kind of context.
Right.
Even the more negative stuff, the story of Daniel, the way that
Right.
they did that, even that was a little bit darker, but it had the happy ending aspect to it too. So all of these things that appeal to really, really young children, catchy music with simple lyrics,
Yeah.
simple Bible verses set to music. These things get in there. They get in there when you're really, really young. And you may not remember being 2 years old in nursery or 1 year old or less in nursery, but you're placed in that environment and you are hearing it.
Yep.
And it does get in there. So when you get to be a little bit older, there's familiarity there already. And you're already softened up to it. And you accept it because you're a child.
Right.
And these are adults telling you these things. So they must be true and they must be real. I don't know of any 2 or 3 year old who's going to challenge something that an adult says.
No.
They have no sense of autonomy. They can't argue. They can't reason. They can't escape it. That's the scary part.
Yeah.
They cannot escape it. Their minds are not set up to question
Right.
anything that they're being told. And that's a problem.
It is a problem.
It's a huge problem.
And I was doing some research about child preachers.
Yep.
And every so often, some ridiculous little video will go viral of this 4-year-old preaching just like the preacher in the pulpit.
Oh, yeah.
And that goes around viral, and it makes funny articles and makes some money for some website somewhere or
Yep.
YouTube. But there are still places who ordain as ministers kids who are 11
Or younger.
or younger, or, even a little older. It's still kind of ridiculous because they don't know anything else at 11.
Right. And 11 is kind of at the cusp of the age group that we're talking about
Right.
tonight. But we're talking about people who are just beginning to
Right.
develop, or should be just beginning to develop, a sense of autonomy.
Right.
And this is what's coming out of them. This is what they're aspiring to. This is what they consider to be their ideal.
Right.
And I was telling you about one of our friends' kids when I was still a teenager in the youth group. My mother was friends with this family that we used to hang out together quite a bit. And one of the younger kids used to stand in front of the mirror and pretend that he was preaching. And his mother told us that that's what he does. He stands in front of the mirror and pretended to be the senior pastor
Yes.
of our church.
Because kids imitate what they think is kind of neat or what they are in front of a lot.
And there's a lot of energy in the way
Right.
that a lot of evangelical
Right.
preachers deliver their messaging. So even if the kid doesn't understand it at all, he understands how it makes him feel.
Right.
And the energy that comes off of that can be very, very powerful. Whether they understand the message or not, as they get older, they've got a positive picture of it in their head
Right.
because it made them feel good when they were a
Right.
kid.
And it gave them praise from their parents. And,
Oh, yeah.
That's a very powerful thing. And unfortunately, there's a lot of parents who will push their kid into the precocious child preacher mold. I think there was one really obnoxious kid in the 90s who did the talk show circuit.
It was,
who was-
I know who you're talking about. It was a little bit
Yeah.
earlier than that.
Yeah.
But I can remember I can remember the kid that you're talking. I don't remember what his name was.
Yeah, I don't
but
remember.
He was on. Do you remember the show Real People?
Yes.
He was on an episode of that.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And I remember
that.
him being interviewed by, I think it might have been either John Davidson or Fran Tarkenton, or one of the ones who was on that show.
Right.
And asked him why he was doing what he was doing. And this child sits there and with a straight face tells him, the voice of the Lord came to me and told me I needed to do this.
Right.
At whatever age he was when it happened, he had to be incredibly young.
But, you know, the parents were primed for it. And it's a very big phenomenon, especially in Pentecostalism
Yep.
and evangelicalism. The kid in Maryland, the 11-year-old, that was in 2012. So he's probably still doing his thing.
Probably.
The youngest on record was Marjo Gortner. He was 4 years old when he was ordained as a preacher in California.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard of him.
And his mother would stand in the back and make little gestures. You should go forward and raise your hand. And she would make all these little gestures.
Right, because it's all theatrics.
It's all theatrics. And, you know, kid sounded good. He didn't sound like he really understood what he was talking about.
Whether it was good or bad, it was novel.
It
and
was
I'm sure
novel.
It was a huge draw
And that
because it was novel.
Yeah, and that was in, like, I believe 1940 or 1950. I want to say
It was in that
somewhere
neighborhood.
in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
But when it was really popular was in the 1920s, almost right after Azusa Street, right?
Azusa Street was, I think, 1918.
Right. So in the 20s, you've got all of this stuff happening. You've got the flapper movement. And in response, almost, you have the child preachers and especially the girl child preachers.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
It was huge in the 1920s. And I thought it was really interesting because there was this one article online that I saw that it wasn't just revivalists who were using young women. The atheists were also giving a platform to young women to start, like, calling people to basically come to Darwin.
That's interesting.
And there was a little, I think it's like a tabloid page where it's like girl evangelist versus girl atheist in a duel for America's soul.
Wow. What's the site you're looking at?
Right now I'm looking at girlevangelist.org. It's the accompanying website for a book about girl evangelists.
Okay.
I think the book is called The Golden Age of Girl Evangelists, 1920s and 1930s.
Who's the author?
Thomas Robertson and Lynette Ruff.
Thomas Robertson and Lynette Ruff.
Out of the Mouths of Babes, girl evangelists in the flapper era.
Wow.
So,
That's really interesting.
but it was a real battle between, basically, you have the worldly women who wore the short skirts and the shingled hair, all of these girl evangelists dressed in white and carrying roses. Mm-hmm. It's kind of sad because one of the most popular girl evangelists did it all through the 20s and 30s. And after she got married, she had like a breakdown and was like in and out of institutions for decades.
Well, I mean, that's what that kind of thinking does to you. What were we talking about last week?
Right. But, you know, and also she was working from the age of 11 every night because she was a revivalist.
Yeah.
So she wasn't just preaching at one church. She was traveling. Most of these children were traveling around with tutors and whatever they needed.
And it's really sad because most children who are exposed to this, like, directly out of the womb, are robbed of elements of their childhood. But these kids were literally robbed of their very childhoods.
Yeah.
Because they were thrust into real adult kind of stuff when they were young enough to still be able to be children and do the things that children do. And when I look at some of the things that I went through and some of the things that I missed out on because I chose the evangelical path, it's like, you know, at least when I was a kid, I was still allowed to go to McDonald's and I was still allowed to hang out with neighborhood kids and play kickball and do all this stuff. I wasn't on stages and touting all of this tripe.
Right.
That wasn't me. So as much as I lost and as much as I regret not being smarter about and not getting out faster and younger,
Right.
I had a charmed life
Yeah.
in comparison to some of these kids.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Uldine Utley was one of the biggest ones. That's the one I was talking about, who basically did this whole thing as long as she could. And she mentioned that she felt lonely being the only girl preacher. And she always liked when there were other ones.
Right.
Like if they were doing a big thing, at least there were other kids. But it's like she didn't have any peer group.
Right. I was thinking the same thing. There were other kids, but what did she have in common with them?
Right.
Very, very precious little.
No, but they were other child preachers. At least they could understand what she was dealing with.
Right.
Even if they were different ages, that's her peer group.
Right, but how much exposure
But
did she really have to them? This was
not
long
much.
before the days of social media,
Yeah.
so those moments when
Were-
she was with people her own age to whom she could really relate were very few and far between.
Right.
11 years old, and this is your life.
Yeah.
And I think about how I started preaching sermons when I was about 15 or 16, but it was in a much more controlled thing. And I
Right.
did have people cheering me on, but it was nothing like that.
No, it's kind of crazy. Uldine did a ton of stuff. She did a ton of work. She started a magazine. She wrote, I think, a couple of books. I mean, seriously, these were working children in a decade when child labor laws were not a thing.
Right. Now, there's a part of me that says that's kind of impressive because it says
Yeah.
a lot about where our
mean-
education system was then. But,
Right.
when you think about the subject matter
Yeah.
of these books and just how deeply those thoughts had to be placed in a child's mind for a
Right.
child to be able to write a book's worth of information about it,
Yeah.
it's pretty scary.
It is scary. She was one of the more impressive ones, though. She could use scripture naturally.
Oh,
Like
there's no
she
doubt that it's
already knew
impressive.
it. She already knew it and understood what she was saying. Not like some of these other kids, like who would memorize the stuff and it would all be choppy.
Right, but imagine if all the stuff that was crammed into her head had to do with science.
Yeah,
or
it would
math.
have been pretty amazing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because if she was capable of retaining all of that to the point where she could put it down coherently on paper, then she was also more than capable of learning stuff that would actually help humanity too.
Yeah, but these kids are still out there, and they're especially, I think, where is it now? Brazil. There are a lot of child preachers in Brazil, especially. Not as many in the United States. But I think people are
it's kind of
sensible.
gravitated away from here
Yeah.
because the adults are running the show now.
Yeah.
And they're doing it in very specific ways.
Yes.
And while there is a huge push in, especially, I don't want to say especially, but I'm going to talk about what I know. In AG circles, there's a huge push as youth pastors to motivate young people to go into full-time ministry. But at that point, you're dealing with middle schoolers. You're not dealing with people quite that young at that point.
Right.
So what I was saying before, they soften them up
Right.
when they're that young. And then once they're on the cusp of that age where they start developing a sense of autonomy, that's when they start taking it away from them and saying, this is your identity. It is no longer I that liveth, but Christ that liveth within me.
Right.
I have to die to myself. I have to take up my cross daily. And all of these things start getting into their heads. And that's when they are prime
Yeah.
to be motivated into quote unquote full-time ministry without so much as a thought to what it's going to do to their entire lives and how it's going to limit what they can do with their lives.
Yeah.
But it starts in the nursery, but there are also other avenues to reaching that age group. There are a lot of evangelical daycare services out there.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of them are run by churches, but some are also run by individuals. They all have the same goals in mind, and that is that softening that goes on,
Yeah.
where they slip the indoctrination in with all kinds of things that appeal to kids, and it prepares them for what's going to happen when they are older children, when they are teenagers, when they're college age young adults. It all builds on each other. And the foundation for it starts when they're babies. So daycare services are among some of the most nefarious as far as I'm concerned. For a number of reasons. Children who are left in evangelical daycare are often subjected to religious cartoons and TV shows just like they would be in the nursery at church. There's music, there are games, there are activities. All of it just shoving that indoctrination in. You know, I can remember doing little projects when I was 6 and 7 years old at chapel. There was one time in particular where we made little scrolls with Bible verses on them. And we used pencils and construction paper, and we would glue the pencils to the construction paper, and we would write scripture verses on the construction paper. And they basically turned into flashcards. Because that's how I learned a lot of verses when I was younger. It's like we did this one exercise in Sunday school one week, and then I found myself doing more on my own. I went home and started making more of these scrolls with more verses that I was learning in Sunday school, and just started learning a lot of Bible verses that way. So they make it fun, and they make it something that you want to keep exploring on your own. The thing is that these things are done outside of the presence of their parents, completely without the knowledge or consent of some parents, because not every kid that gets put in an evangelical daycare is the child of an evangelical parent. While some choose these services because of their religious affiliation, church-based daycare services are often funded in part by churchgoer contributions, aka tithes, and are frequently some of the most cost-effective solutions in the communities that they operate in. So you've got a mother who's low income and needs some place to put their kid. They're going to be looking primarily at cost. So if they can find a low or lower cost daycare where they can leave their kids, they're not thinking about really what's happening when they're there. As long as when they come to pick up the kid seems happy, they're unhurt, unharmed, they look like they've been cared for well, that's really all that they're going to think about. But while the kids are there, they're getting all of this. They're getting all of the indoctrination, whether the parents consent to it or not. And since most of these daycares don't typically hide their church affiliation, they simply assume that a contract with a parent to provide daycare services within a structured religious environment is understood to mean that the child will have exposure to the religion and its tenets in educational and persuasive ways. They assume this, but a lot of times they don't say anything. Now, sometimes it's in the paperwork. Sometimes they do divulge, this is the type of thing that's going to happen during the day. This is what we do at this time. We have a Bible study at this time. We watch these videos at this time. It could be in there just for the purposes of disclosure of this is what your kid's day looks like. But I can tell you as an 11-year veteran driving instructor that when you hand a parent a packet of information that they sign off on stating that they've read it and understood it, most of them don't. Most of them have no clue. That is very, very heavily evidenced in some of the things that they complain about to the driving school. It's like, well, why are we doing this? Or why are you doing this? Or why do I have to do this? Well, it's all there in that packet that you signed off on stating that you read and understood. Did you read it and understand it? Well, it's the same thing with this. They figure if the place has a good reputation, their kids are going to be safe. That's really all they care about. And all this mumbo jumbo, yeah, okay, whatever, where do I sign? So a lot of them have no clue. Even if it's divulged, even if it's not something that they're trying to hide, a lot of parents have no clue what's going on with their kids during the day while they're at work. And the indoctrination is flowing over and over and over again. It's just flowing and flowing and flowing day in and day out. And these kids are developing beliefs without even realizing that they're developing beliefs. Parental consent is also not a major consideration with a lot of these organizations. Now, that's not so much true with daycares, but there are and have been over the years a lot of evangelical groups that are geared toward children that very deliberately circumvent parental influence
Right.
to bring this messaging to kids. And in the course of my research, I came across an interesting article. I believe this was from 2014. I'm popping it right back up now. This was out in Portland, Oregon. And yes, this was an article from a local TV station, KATU2 in Portland. And this was from Wednesday, July 23rd, 2014. Evangelical group works to convert children in Portland. And you see a picture of these children's ministry workers and the kids and some of the things that they're doing. And this is what the article had to say. An evangelical Christian group is trying to convert children as young as 5 at Portland apartment pools, public parks, and dozens of other gathering spots this summer. A campaign that's got hundreds of parents upset.
Right.
It goes on to talk about some of the things that they do. They pretend to be a mainstream Christian Bible study when in fact they're a very old school fundamentalist sect. Parents should know that out-of-state evangelical fundamentalists are in Portland trying to convert children as young as 5 years old using misleading tactics. I'm getting goosebumps just reading this because I'm thinking, oh my goodness, if this was my kid and I had my brain today and found out that my kid went swimming and only went to that pool to go swimming and was being indoctrinated by these nutters. Oh, no. That would not bode well with me at all. At least, at a very minimum, let me know what you're talking to my kid about. And with all due respect, if you're an adult and I'm not around, stay the fuck away from my kid.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously. Why on earth would they even think that this was okay? But this was 6 years ago in Portland. And fortunately, it raised enough attention that the right people got involved.
Right.
And started saying, oh, no. You're not going to do this with our kids. But they don't care. They flat out don't care whether or not they have anybody's consent because this is their mandate. They've been told by God to do this.
Right.
So who the fuck are these parents to tell them that they shouldn't? Okay?
Yeah.
This is a spiritual mandate. It shows up 5 times in the New Testament. They have to go and make disciples. And it's very, very easy to make disciples out of children because they will believe anything that they are told by an adult with ice cream. Okay?
Yeah.
I'm just putting that out there. I can remember the retreat that I went on where I first quote unquote spoke in tongues, and the speaker there talking about how he converted a homeless person at McDonald's,
Right.
because and the person was hungry, and even he admitted right there from the pulpit, he's like, and I don't know how long it had been since this person had eaten, so I mean I probably could have said anything. We're sitting there having our McDonald's, and do you want to accept Jesus? Oh yeah. It's like, I could have said anything. Do you want to accept Buddha? Oh, yeah. They know. They know precisely what buttons to press.
Right.
And with children, it's so easy. You press their buttons with things that appeal to kids, with cartoonish music and little plays and puppet shows and things that they're going to identify with. So now they like you, and of course they're going to believe you. Of course they're going to follow you and do what you say. Everything that we teach our kids not to do when they are approached by strangers. You know, a stranger who wants to do your child harm is going to try to befriend them first, too.
Right.
So now I don't think that these people had any kind of unscrupulous intent because this is what their faith told them that they needed to be doing. But I don't think that they thought it through to the point where they even considered what it would feel like if it was their kid.
Yeah.
And it was their kid being taught something that they didn't want them taught. What if these people had children of their own and they were set upon by atheists who were telling them that the things that their parents believed were crazy?
Yeah.
And handing them ice cream. You know? Yeah, mom's crazy. Ooh, chocolate, my favorite. You know, that's the way that it would go. So it doesn't even matter what the messaging is. If you can establish just a modicum of trust and make these children like you, then you can put anything in there.
Right.
You can get them to believe in anything. And believe me, these people knew that and they understood it. I don't think that their motivations were dark or sinister or anything like that. It's what they'd been taught. But
Right.
it doesn't make it any better, and it doesn't make it right.
Right.
Oh, there was another one here. Let me see if I can pop this website up real quick. This comes from a website called cefonline.com. And CEF stands for Child Evangelism Fellowship. This is an entire organization that is geared toward indoctrinating little children. And they're out there right now. This is a modern website. They have been out there for a while, and they are looking for support. They're looking for more people to help out with their cause. And as you scroll down, this number, again, it's raising goosebumps on me reading this. It says 25,182,420 children reached in 2019. Oh. How many of their parents were involved? How many of their parents even knew that their children had contact with someone from this organization? Every child, every nation, every day. When you look at their map and you look at the places that they've been in, we're talking about all of North America, some of Central America and South America, and this is really interesting, some of Western Europe, but it looks like almost all of Russia. So they are making the rounds.
Right.
And they are targeting children. They are doing all kinds of things. Let's see what some of their ministries are. I looked at this earlier, but let's see what they do. They run a ministry called Good News Club. Good News Club is a ministry of Child Evangelism Fellowship in which trained teachers meet with groups of children in schools, homes, community centers, churches, just about anywhere that children can easily and safely meet with their parents' permission. Now, they make that caveat,
right,
that it's with their parents' permission. So the parents that send their kids to the Good News Club know that they're sending their kids to the Good News Club. But I still have to wonder how much they really understand about what's happening when those kids are there. Are they reading the documentation, or are they just signing off on it?
Right.
That's a problem. They have something called the 5-Day Club. It's an exciting, fun-filled 1.5 hour held each day for 5 consecutive days. Sounds like VBS, Vacation Bible School. It includes dynamic Bible lessons, creative learning activities, inspiring missionary stories. You can see what they're trying to do there. Meaningful songs. Oh, we did an entire episode on church music.
Songs, yes.
Life-changing scripture memorization. So this is the type of thing that they're going to do with your kids. They're going to cram the indoctrination in there any way they can, up to and including putting these verses in their heads so that it's seared in there for time and eternity. I would look at this, even as an evangelical parent, I would want to know more about what they're teaching my kid, because there's so much disparity between what even 2 Pentecostal organizations believe, that I would want to know more about this. But, this bright and lively website of theirs and all of the things that they talk about. City Kids, Camp Good News, Military Children's Ministry. They're really covering the bases. Youth Challenge for teens, and it looks from the look of it, it looks like this is teens to college and career. All kinds of outreach ministries. We're going to talk about that a little bit more next week when we talk about things like neighborhood outreach and AIM, Ambassadors in Mission. We're going to be talking about that next week too. Yeah. And then there are all kinds of resources, all kinds of numbers that you can call. This is an established organization, and they really have their bases covered. And they're doing the exact same thing that these people in Portland were doing. It's just that they're doing it with a little bit more parental consent.
Right.
It's in the documents that you said you read and understood, did you? I'll tell you what, I've had some conversations with some parents since I became a driving instructor about all of those things that they agreed to and understood, and there really isn't much. So people being the same kind of creatures all around, regardless of how they think and how they've been indoctrinated, I have to imagine that there's a good quorum of them that simply have no clue what's really going on over the course of a day in one of these ministries. Yeah. So let's talk specifically about pre-K children's ministry. I can remember even my grandmother, long before I was exposed to anything evangelical, I had the children's Bible on vinyl record.
Oh yeah,
Did you ever hear
that.
these?
I had that.
With every time God spoke, there was a loud clap of thunder.
Thunder, yes.
Yeah. And
I had the same ones. They were like a big 2-record set
Yep.
and like comic booky.
Yes.
Yes, I had the same thing.
But they weren't like comic books. Some of those images were frightening. Do you
Oh,
remember
yeah.
the one of Jesus being tempted in the desert and
Vaguely.
the picture of the devil?
Yeah.
That was, I saw that in my nightmares.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
It was nightmare fuel.
Yeah.
And this was geared toward children.
Mm-hmm.
And they told these stories from a very childlike perspective. They told the story of Samson and Delilah, but didn't really get into the real nature of their relationship.
Right.
You know, they talked about a lot of things. The two women and the baby, King
Right.
Solomon and the two women and the baby.
Oh, yeah.
There were all kinds of stories. Most of them were Old Testament, but then they did get into the New Testament stuff too,
Yeah.
because there was that part about Jesus being tempted in the desert and other things from the New Testament. But there were a lot of Old Testament stories in there, and some of them were downright scary.
Oh, yeah.
Even the way that they were presented for children
Yeah.
was downright scary. But pre-K is a vital age because that's where all of that softening up starts. And this is how they start converting children at a young age. Whether it's at their parents' knee or as part of one of these ministries, it could go either way. Because I was dumbfounded. The first year that I went away to Word of Life, it was the first real mainstream exposure that I had to evangelical religion, because chapel talked about being born again, but I didn't quite understand it then. And they didn't really push it with the younger kids. It was only when I went away to Word of Life for the first year that I started understanding that there were people out there who were going after children as young as 2 and 3 and 4 years old. I was dumbfounded. All the kids that were in the cabin that I was in that first year, we all went around and we introduced ourselves. And you know how they give you the several pieces of information. Okay, your name,
Right.
where you're from, and when you were saved. I had no idea what they were talking about. No clue, because I hadn't had any exposure to that yet. But I'm listening to these people talking about, my name is Greg and I'm from wherever, and I was saved when I was 4 years old, blah, blah, blah. I was saved when I was 3. I was saved when I was 7. I was saved when I was 5.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, was saved from what? What in the world are these people talking about? And you know what? I became a target
Yeah.
when it got to be my turn,
Bet.
because I actually said that. I said, my name is Joe. I'm from here in New York, and I haven't the foggiest clue what you're talking about when you say you were saved. Saved from what? Oh, my goodness. You could have seen, I mean, everybody's eyes just lit up like Christmas trees. And it's like,
We got
wow,
one.
you're 13 years old and you don't know about that? Oh, have we got something for you?
Have we got something to sell to you?
But at 4 years old, and the first kid said he was 4 years old. And it would only be a couple more days before I really completely understood this. And of course, now I'm sitting there thinking, like, I missed out on something. They got me believing that I had missed out on something because I didn't get to experience this until I was 13. So, of course, I was excited about it. Now I'm thinking I have a lot of catching up to do. But that pre-K segment is critical. And so many kids get quote-unquote saved at those early ages. We're going to talk about Jesus Camp later. And that kid in Jesus Camp, 5 years old. I got saved when I was 5 because I wanted to experience more of life. I have something to say about that, but I'm going to save it for later because I think it's a kind of a good closing. But,
Yeah.
I definitely have something to say about that one. But just the simple fact that you've got a 5-year-old who thinks like that tells me everything that I need to know about this particular agenda and what it does to people and how it completely wrecks you mentally and emotionally and robs you of any chance that you might ever have to be a free thinker and to be able to have an independent thought and actually critique and analyze and question these things. Because when you're getting saved at 4, you're not questioning much.
Right.
And you'll still believe, most people will still believe the same thing at 40, 60, and 80 because their parents taught them to believe something when they were 3 and it clicked when they were 4.
Right.
So
Yeah.
there's so much that they do to ensnare this age group. I did a lot of children's ministry, especially during my internship. But before that, too, there was that church in New Jersey that I was responsible for the kids ministry. And there were like no teenagers. Otherwise, I would have been their youth director there, too.
Right.
There were a lot of really, really young children. And I remember these things going through my head, too. What the best ways would be to reach them and to convey this messaging to them. And I've always been very creative. So I actually wrote a lot of scripts for things like puppet shows and little skits. And because of where my head was at the time, I think about some of this stuff now and it's like, dear God, you scared the living shit out of these kids. Of course they listened to you. Of course, when you told them that Jesus was the way out of this, of course they ran to it because you probably gave them fucking nightmares with some of the stuff that you were teaching them. But here's the thing. Biblical stories, darkly themed biblical stories, are given a light, cartoonish kind of slant. But they still have that dark element. They still have that menacing and scary element. But it's framed in a way that it is going to understand and latch on to. And let me tell you something. Those scary moments are absolutely 100% intended.
Yeah.
And just like the Mark IV movies, fear is a huge tool in evangelicalism to get you to believe the things they want you to believe. Because if there's no threat involved, then there's really no benefit. When you think about the type of heaven that Christians are looking forward to, there's no real personal benefit to any of it.
Right.
So instead of selling them on the concept of heaven, we sell them on the concept of hell. Because that seems scary. We sell them on the concept of the devil. Because the devil is scary. That image that is still burned into my mind from the artwork from that children's Bible record set. It's still burned. Actually, you know what? That it wasn't the records. You know what it was? It was the children's Bible. Do you ever have the children's Bible
No,
with
I didn't
all the
have
illustrations?
That. I think we still have that around.
That's where that came from.
Yeah.
It wasn't from the records. It was from that book.
Okay.
And I remember seeing that over and over and over. There was all kinds of really dark artwork in that book, and it was a children's book.
Yeah.
It was Bible stories told in a way that children can understand, but some of those images were terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. And that is on purpose. Once you've put this scary stuff in their head, now they're being told that if they believe in Jesus, they don't have to be afraid of any of it because Jesus will save them and Jesus will protect them. So now you've got this scary thing over here waiting to get you, but here's Jesus waiting here to protect you. So what are you going to do about that? Of course you're going to get saved because you don't want that bad stuff to happen to you. And as a child, that's all you understand. This stuff bad, Jesus good, so let's just choose Jesus. It doesn't hurt that they're being reinforced with things that are aesthetically pleasing or that are just going to be associated with good things, positive things, things that look good, sound good, taste good. That's why there's always that element to it. I can remember the way that we did children's ministry, especially the summer that I was interning, but our youth pastor had kind of taken on the role of the children's pastor too. He was doing a lot of this, and he was actually enthusiastic about me being back for a little while because he was able to unload some of that on me. And it just so happened that I was pretty good at it.
Right.
I didn't like doing it that much, but I was pretty good at it. So I got that kind of unloaded onto me during that summer. And it did continue a little bit after we had had our stint at Mission Impossible and I came back to Faith Assembly. I was still doing some stuff with the children's ministry because it was what I knew well at that point. It's not like I didn't like working with the youth group and older kids, but I had made some real headway with the children's ministry during my internship, and it just seemed natural to a lot of the powers that were at the time to just put that back in my hands. Right. So I did more of it than I ever really wanted to, but I was good at it. And it was evidenced by the response that the stuff that I came up with got. We had a couple of specific curricula that we were using, but I always added my own accompaniments to it. I added my own stuff to make it a little bit more AG-ish, I guess, would
Yeah.
be the best way to describe that. But the thing that really gets me about this, and they don't just do this to kids, they do this to adults too. But going back to the whole idea of softening up those brains, they tell these stories from the Bible that any rational thinking person is going to look at and say, this is nothing but allegory. There's no possible way that any of this stuff
Right.
actually happened. But they start teaching these kids from the time they can understand that these stories are true.
Right.
Which makes them a whole lot more exciting than fairy tales, because these things actually happened. And they present biblical allegory as literal truth. And you start believing that when you're in that pre-K category. So now when you're an adult, you don't think twice about the fact that your entire faith hinges on the fact that a girl ate an apple given to her by a talking snake. You don't think that that's weird, because from the time that you can understand and comprehend, you're being told all this stuff is true.
Right.
And an adult told you it was true, so it must be true. Well, now that I'm an adult, shouldn't I be thinking a little bit more objectively about this? Well, no, I really can't. Because like we talked about last week, there are things that are now in my brain that are physically encoded in there that are telling me to simply believe it.
Right.
And that, believe me when I tell you, that is on purpose. Once children are old enough to get out of nursery, that's when they start getting exposed to these kinds of children's ministries. And they have their own services.
Right.
Because there were very few services that summer
Oh,
that I was
yeah.
actually in the sanctuary for, because I was doing children's ministry.
Right.
And I wasn't in the main service a lot of time over that summer. So they give the children their own service that is basically nothing but a bunch of puppet shows and movies and teaching them little songs where they learn Bible verses and all of that.
Yeah.
But before they even get to their own service, first they have Sunday school that's geared toward pre-K. They have little clubs for the kids that are geared toward pre-K. And then we get into things like Vacation Bible School, which a lot of them start at kindergarten, but a lot of them also have support material for kids who are younger than that.
Right.
So that all the kids can go at the same time. So if you are in 5th grade, but you have a sibling who is still pre-K, everybody goes to VBS.
Right.
Because there are enough adults to look after everybody, and the older siblings look after the younger siblings. So as young as they can get them in there, they get them in there. Then there are things like Trunk or Treat, the
Oh, yeah.
trick-or-treating alternative, which is not specifically evangelical, but it's one of those things that they've really picked up the ball and run with.
Right.
Because what we were talking about before, indoctrination goes better with ice cream.
Yeah.
Goes better with candy too.
Right.
So you hear all of these words and you have the immediate association of something sweet, something good, something that feels good to you. And all of that stuff just gets globbed together in your brain. And even the scary story that you had to listen to, it's okay because Jesus is going to protect me. And oh, look, Reese's Cups.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's how they get into the mind of children. They know precisely what buttons to press. They know what is going to get the best response out of them. And it's amazing how simple the things are that you need to do to get little children to listen to you and like you enough to keep listening to you.
Right.
It's amazing to me how easy it is and how little effort it takes when you're that young and you are relying on everybody else to do your thinking for you. The problem is most evangelicals continue that trend well into adulthood. And I keep saying I want to do an episode on childlike faith. So I'm going to kind of leave that there because that's more for that particular subject. I definitely want to get to that because, man, there's so many examples of how people just go into Never Never Land in their head and never grow up because of what their religion teaches them. And when you grow up in an environment where it's all rosy and happy and Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so, it's kind of hard when you're older to let go of it because
Yeah.
it feels good. And it still feels good. You graduate from Jesus Loves Me, This I Know to the latest Hillsong CD, but it's an upgrade to the same type of thing. They use the same indoctrination tactics on adults that they use on kids, but they're priming children from birth to be ready for this. Right. This is what worship is. This is what religion is. This is what the one and only way to God looks like.
Right.
And boy, oh boy, when you're that little and you learn to think that way and there's no one in your life telling you to think differently, it just stays there.
Yeah.
And that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Because someone needs to tell you to think differently. If no one has told you to think differently until now, tonight is your night. It's time to start thinking differently, and that is why I call this show Unbound. Because this, like I said last week, this religion is the most shackling, most life-stealing thing there is out there. And we need to unbind our thoughts from the things that we were taught when we were children. We need to unbind our thoughts from the notion that there are spiritual absolutes that will govern things that are going to happen after we die. We have to get unbound from that. But I'll tell you, the process is not easy, especially when it starts when you are under 1 year old. And you're listening to Michael Card singing about sleep sound in Jesus and singing songs about let me tell you of a man who was before the world began. I forget what the rest of it is, but he had a whole tape of lullabies. We played this for our kid every single night. Started dumping that indoctrination into our kid when he was an infant. Let me tell you of a man who was before the world began, something about salvation's plan, and his name was Jesus. He was born a babe like you. What was the rest of it?
I don't know.
He was born a babe like you, and blah, blah, blah. I hope that you will know him too and live your life for Jesus. And this is what we played for our infant son, so that it would get in there before he could understand. It was going in there.
Yeah.
You know, I'm ashamed of it now, but he's doing all right.
He's doing okay.
Because he's watched us change so much that then he would have to be confused about anything spiritual. And that's okay, because if the confusion keeps him from being exposed to it, then great. I feel like we're doing our job. At this point, I feel like we're doing our job. Even though there was a lot of confusion there, even though we changed horses on him in the middle of the race many times as he was growing up, at least now we've got a firm footing. And I don't think that he ever had enough of a footing in any of that to be able to say, yeah, but. There are no real yeah, buts in his head about any of this.
He never got involved very deeply in any religion. It was mostly just surfacey type things.
Right.
You know, especially since we got out of evangelicalism fairly shortly. I mean, I think he was 6.
He was young.
Really
the
young.
last time that I went to a church service was at the Episcopal Church.
Yeah.
And that was it had to have been 2011 or 2012, because
Something
it was
like
right
that.
after I had adopted Wicca. And I was thinking to myself, you know, it's not a good idea to continue in this particular ministry path when I don't believe in it anymore.
Right.
It had to be around that time. So around 2012 was the last time that he had exposure to anything that was overtly Christian. We did a very, very short stint in UU, which I think was better for him, but I also don't think he really got a whole hell of a lot of what was going on there either.
No.
And while I don't see any real harm in UU, I don't really see the point in it either.
Right.
I went probably for a good 6 months just because it gave me the church anchor that I felt like I needed.
Yeah.
But I really honestly don't see that much of a point to it. And I don't want to offend any UUs out there. I know there are a lot of atheists who are involved in the Unitarian Universalist movement. That's perfectly fine. If it works for you, that's great. Whatever floats your boat. For me, it just didn't seem like it made any sense to keep doing it. And that was the last quote unquote church experience that Liam had, that our son had. Fortunately, I'm pretty sure that he escaped a lot of the stuff like VBS.
Yeah.
He never did any of the summer camps. He never
Nope.
did Vida Nueva or anything like that. No kids retreats or anything like that. He was we were kind of out of that part of it by the
Right.
time he was old enough to experience any of it. So, I mean, I'm thankful because from the time he was born, I always had these thoughts in my head and, very positive, uplifting thoughts in my head of him going on a VN weekend and all of it just finally clicking with him.
Right.
Thank goodness that never happened because I'll tell you what, I've had enough damage to undo with him over the years,
Yeah.
over other things, without having to add religion into the mix.
Yeah.
He's watched us evolve, and I just think that he's kind of on the outside looking in. He never really retained a whole lot of it anywhere.
No.
So
I think that
was
the most he's ever said is that he kind of misses the services around Christmas.
good. Oh, yeah.
But I get that.
Oh, totally. I mean, I don't think that there's anything necessarily wrong with experiencing something like that. If you're like with family and they want to go to a midnight mass or something, I don't see anything necessarily wrong with it as long as you see it for what it is.
Right.
It's nothing but theatrics. There's
Right.
no truth to it. But I'm sorry, the Christmas story, the way that it's framed, is very moving. It's a story of hope. And when you look at it from that perspective and you don't start basing your whole fucking life on it,
Yeah.
then it can be very inspiring. You look at it from the perspective of a story about hope and what the birth of the Christ child was supposed to do for humanity. I don't see anything necessarily wrong with enjoying an evening of nice music, of a choir singing and lighting candles and all of the things that go along with a Christmas Eve service or a midnight mass at Easter. I used to love midnight mass.
Oh, I know. We went, I think, once.
Yeah, I think I might have taken you to that once.
Yeah.
But I went for several years, and it's also a very moving experience because you're sitting there and you're waiting for midnight to show up
Yeah.
because now it's officially Easter Sunday, and as soon as the clock strikes midnight, then the mass goes from being very somber to very celebratory.
Right.
And the emotional high that you get from that is very moving also. If you can look at it for what it is and more of an interactive stage show than anything else, then I don't see where that in and of itself is a bad thing. But it needs to be experienced from that perspective. The minute you start looking at it as literal truth is when you start running into problems. And the minute
Right.
you start teaching your kid that this is literal truth, that's when you're going to start running into problems, especially if you're like us and later on you wise up and you realize that all of this is fictitious. And I've taught my kid that it's true. Now what?
Yeah.
I've said many times before, I had way more physical evidence for the existence of Santa Claus than I ever did the existence of Jesus.
Right.
And I had to learn and live with the grim reality that Santa Claus wasn't real. But I was still a kid. And I still had time to recover from that and understand that it was just a game, that it was just a game that parents play with their kids. Religion, we're supposed to look at it as literal truth. And, if Santa Claus isn't real, but I could see evidence of Santa Claus, I'm supposed to believe that Jesus is real without any evidence whatsoever. Okay, well, you know what? They have answers for that too. They start tying meaning to all sorts of things and start telling you that this is an answer to prayer and this happened because Jesus did it.
Yeah.
So now instead of presents under the Christmas tree, they're pulling things that are largely and sometimes purely coincidental and just tagging Jesus onto it because now we have to make this look more real because
Yeah.
we made Santa Claus look real. Now we have to make this look real. But the difference there is that parents who are doing that probably literally believe that what they're teaching them about Jesus is real. So that extra level of sincerity, and especially in evangelical circles where you want your children to be saved so they won't go to hell, there's also that sense of urgency
Right.
that goes along with that. Kids get a lot of mixed messages when it comes to things that they're supposed to believe in. But that, I think, is why evangelical churches start so early on, because they want the constancy of this messaging to circumvent anything that these kids learn about Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. They wanted to circumvent that. They wanted to look more real and be made more real in their heads from the time that they can understand. So I think I actually just got to one of the websites that talks about birth to. Oh yeah, here we go. This is the Assemblies of God Girls Ministries. Used to be called Missionettes. It looks, I can't find that word anywhere on here, so it looks like they've abandoned that name, and they're just calling it Girls Ministries now. If I'm wrong about that, someone can correct me, but I have scoured this page, and I don't see the word Missionettes anymore. A lot of the same terminology is still there, a lot of stuff that I remember, but right here on their own website, our preschool elementary curriculum is for ages 3 through 5th grade. We have curriculum for the following age groups: birth to 36 months, preschool 3 and up, kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, and 3rd and 5th grade. That's just for the girls. And they go right into what these different ministries are. There is written, purchasable curricula for all of this. Birth to 36 months, you have Sunlight Kids. Preschool 3 and up, Rainbows. Kindergarten, Daisies. 1st and 2nd grade are Prims. 3rd to 5th grade are Stars.
Yeah.
And beyond that, they're just going to get dumped into the youth group pool.
Right.
Because as soon as you get into middle school, now it's about teen ministry. And quote unquote, teen ministry can start as young as 11 in some youth groups.
Yeah.
I remember having these conversations with my youth pastor and trying to decide whether or not we wanted to start bringing some younger people into the youth group, because there was sort of kind of a gap there.
Yeah.
A lot of this, especially for the girls, it ended at 5th grade.
Right.
So what about the 6th and 7th graders, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders? What about the middle schoolers?
Yeah.
The preteens right into very early teenagehood.
Yeah.
We used to call our youth group TNT, teens and 20s.
Right.
But it got trunked back over time too. And I want to say that there came a point where there was a split. I think I was done with that at the time, but I do believe that there came a point where there was a split at Faith Assembly, and there was a youth group for the younger kids, and there was a youth group for the older kids. So you had that gap filled in with a couple of different groups, because I'm sorry, you can't put an 11-year-old and an 18-year-old in the same room and expect them to relate to the same things.
Right.
So as we had conversations about making the age requirement lower, there were also other things in the works to cater specifically to that group, because you didn't want to gray the lines. You didn't want fuzzy messaging. You wanted messaging that was for that age group. But when I look at this and realize there are curricula out there for every one of these age groups, and it starts at birth, that is the most shameless thing that I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
I look at that, and now it makes me angry. I mean, back then it'd be like, oh my goodness, we have literally something for everybody. And it would look like a positive thing. Now I'm like, birth, you have curricula that is designed for what, a 2-week-old? Yeah. Yeah, they do. Because with all due respect, that's only about as long as it takes for parents to start bringing their kids to church.
Yeah.
So they come to church, and they've got their infant, their 2-week-old infant there in the service, already hearing the music, already hearing what preaching sounds like. They can't understand any of it, but as they get older, their brain starts deciding what they like and what they don't, and starts recognizing all the differences and the shifts in tone and volume and all of that. They start recognizing it and start developing a set of likes and dislikes. But how old was Liam the first time he was in church?
Oh, he was tiny.
Couple weeks old.
Yeah.
Couple weeks old. And he was already in that environment. I remember feeling a little bit apprehensive about that, only because of the volume during the worship service.
Yeah.
I didn't know if it would scare him. I didn't know if it would affect his hearing.
Right.
So what did we do? What was one of the remedies for that? We put a bunch of blankets in his car seat.
Yeah.
Because for the longest time, he would only sleep in the car seat.
Yeah.
Okay? But we put a bunch of blankets to kind of damper the sound around him. And that kid slept right through those song services. He slept through everything.
Yeah, I did.
But I'm sorry, you're still conscious when you're asleep.
Yeah.
Stuff is still getting in there. And when it gets in there from 2 weeks old, you're used to it by the time you're 13.
Yeah, definitely.
Very, very, very used to it. But that's the AG for you. They start at birth to 36 months and have stuff that you can use to minister to children that young. So for the girls, they have this generic thing now called girls' ministries. The boys still have Royal Rangers. Mm-hmm. Now, for those of you who are not in the know, Royal Rangers is the Assemblies of God's answer to the Boy Scouts.
Right.
And they actually did more with the boys than they did with the girls. It was more of an outward bound kind of thing. They did do camping trips and the same stuff that I did in Boy Scouts.
Right.
Did happen in Royal Rangers, but there was the whole indoctrination slant on it.
Right.
I never went on a Boy Scout jamboree and got roped into a Bible study.
Yeah.
We sat around the campfire and told ghost stories. They sat around the campfire and told Bible stories.
Well,
or
okay.
gave testimonies, listened to each other's testimonies. They would bring in guest speakers that would be there on the Royal Ranger trips so that the indoctrination could just continue and
boy.
continue and continue. And yeah, we're gonna fry up some spam and eggs for breakfast, and we're gonna go on a hike, and we might even go canoeing or do the stuff that you do when you are on a Boy Scout trip. But we're also going to make sure that you get that indoctrination. We're going to bring Jesus into this, and he's going to be the focal point of it. So that's Royal Rangers in a nutshell. I can give you just the quick description here from their website. If it ever comes up, here we go. Your adventure starts today at startroyalrangers.com. Developing the total boy for Christ. I remember that tagline.
Yeah.
They've had that forever. Royal Rangers is an activity-based small group church ministry for boys and young men in grades K through 12. So you can start even younger than Cub Scouts in Royal Rangers. Because I think Cub Scouts started around age 8-ish. I think you had to be in like first or second grade, something like.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure.
So it's a ministry for boys and young men in grades K through 12 with a mission to evangelize, equip, and empower the next generation of Christ-like men and lifelong servant leaders. So that is their mission statement for Royal Rangers. And again, basically it's just saying we're going to take your kids and indoctrinate them. Oh, and I don't know about you, but I have a very, very hard time with the idea of my first grader going on a camping trip with a 12th grader.
Yeah.
There's something there that just doesn't jibe. Now, the way that Faith Assembly did it, that really didn't happen.
Yeah.
They did manage to separate a lot of it.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of times it was the older boys that went on the trips and whatnot. But still, they had stuff for kids who were in kindergarten. I mean, the Boy Scouts couldn't even say that. Cub Scouts couldn't say that. Cub Scouts didn't start at age 5.
No.
That much I know for sure. I'm pretty sure the Cub Scouts for me started around age 8.
Yeah.
But the Assemblies of God and other evangelical organizations, I'll tell you, they want to get in there as early as they possibly can. So if that means adjusting things a little bit so that now we've got kids who are 3 years younger who are involved in this, so much the better. And that's Royal Rangers in a nutshell. It's the Boy Scouts, but it's done with a very, very evangelical and indoctrination-driven slant. One of the things that stood out for me when I was researching this was a movie that came out in 2006. And I, being the snark monster that I can be on social media, I'm on a bunch of groups for horror movie enthusiasts because I happen to be one. And every now and then someone posts a meme that asks, what's the scariest horror movie you've ever seen? And my answer every single time, without even having to think about it, is a movie called Jesus Camp. I don't think that there is a scarier horror movie out there. And the reason why I say that is because you actually get to see what these very, very young children are put through in terms of indoctrination and the way that these people went about indoctrinating them. Jesus Camp was a documentary about a youth pastor named Becky Fisher. So you can look this up. There's all kinds of resources on it. And I also, whether you are evangelicals are just going to look at it and say, oh, well, great, good for her. But those of you who are out of it or looking to get out of it and have started wondering whether or not what you believe is actually, whether it has any merit whatsoever, I think that if you have seen this before and you were knee deep in it, and now you're starting to question, you're going to look at this in a much, much different light. So I recommend watching this if you are on the fence, because I'm pretty sure that you'll see some stuff that offends you at this point. And I'm pretty sure that you will also see stuff that you didn't see back in the day when you watched it first and thought, oh, this is so great. Well, no, it really isn't great at all. There are things that go on in this movie that are absolutely just scary as fuck. You got a bunch of kids venerating a standee of George W. Bush. You've got all kinds of crazy ideas being put into people's heads. And I think I actually found a couple of pages of quotes from this movie. So if you haven't seen it, this is the type of thing that you're going to hear when you watch this movie. Let's see. Let's see what Becky has to say in a couple of scenes here. Now, I also wanted to, at some point, do an episode on violent imagery in Christian music, because there was a lot of that in the 80s.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
a lot of Christian rock and a lot of Christian metal. There were a lot of violent themes, but groups like Petra, in particular, had a lot of war imagery in their music. And there's one part in this movie where this person is getting the entire group all riled up and talking about how she wants to see Christian jihad in this country. It's like, I want to see children who are as... here it is. I got the quote right here. It's no wonder with that kind of intense training and discipling that those young people are ready to kill themselves for the cause of Islam. She's relating how devout Muslims approach their faith, even as children. I want to see young people who are as committed to the cause of Jesus Christ as the young people are committed to the cause of Islam. I want to see them as radically laying down their lives for the gospel as they are over in Pakistan and Israel and Palestine and all those different places, because we have the truth. Did you catch what she said?
Yeah.
I want children willing to lay down their lives.
Yeah.
I want to create children who are okay with the idea of dying for their faith. I don't know of a single child out there that I would want to die for anything.
Yeah.
Especially something like this. But you know what? My mind was in a different place a long time ago, and I can remember thinking this way too. And I can remember even being on my confirmation retreat in the Catholic Church and the concept of martyrdom coming up.
Right.
And reaching a point where your faith is solid enough that you will die for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's not just her. It's not just this organization. The Catholics even did it to me when I was 12 and 13 years old. She gets the audience, all the kids at the camp, all riled up over this, and then starts chanting, "This means war, this means war, this means war." And how many times did we hear that? It's the title of a Petra album.
Yes.
The title of a song on a Petra album. Mm-hmm. And over and over and over again, she's chanting this and getting them to chant it with her. Then there was a kid named Levi.
Yeah.
And this was the one who, at 5 years old, got saved because he wanted more out of life.
Yes.
Okay, that was one of his quotes. And this one from him really stuck with me. When I saw the movie the first time and then seeing it in print, it gives me chills again. Whenever I run into a non-Christian, there's always something that doesn't feel right, something that makes my spirit feel yucky.
Okay.
Ooh, yeah, you see, they're afraid. They're made to be afraid of any different kind of thought.
Yeah.
Because that's really what he's saying there. I encounter someone who doesn't think like me. I don't know what the fuck to do with myself.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying. I feel like we're kind of being trained to be warriors, but in a much funner way. No. There's an excitement, yet peace at the same time, too. It's really cool. So there you go, Becky. There's one kid that looks like she's about ready to lay down her life for her faith. You're definitely doing your job. But this entire movie was it was. I watched this when I was on my way out. It came out in '06. I don't think that I saw it until sometime around 2012 or 2013. And when I looked at it with that slightly different set of eyes,
Right.
and I saw it for what it was very, number one, it was scary.
Yeah.
That's why I say it's the scariest horror movie I've ever seen. But more than it scared me, it pissed me off.
Yeah.
I mean, the Bible speaks against idolatry. When the Israelites made the golden calf, God wasn't very happy about that. But what are these kids doing? They're basically worshiping a standee of George W. Bush and being encouraged to do it. Lay your hands on. They're encouraged in the scene to lay their hands on it and pray for George W. Bush. He was president at the time. Now, if it had been Bill Clinton, I don't think that they would have been venerating it. No. But because it was W, they're going to venerate.
Yeah.
Now, I also found an article from The Guardian. I like The Guardian a lot. I think that they're a decent source. Some of their stuff, you do kind of have to vet a little bit more. But by and large, what they have to say is sound, and it's not tainted with a whole lot of bias. They just kind of report the way that it is. And I found an article called The Kids of Jesus Camp 10 Years Later. So this came out in 2016.
Right.
And they talked to a couple of these kids. Some of them are no longer evangelical. There's one who basically, he's still spiritual.
Right.
But he has abandoned the idea of Christianity and the Hebrew God. And then there was Levi, the one that we were just talking about, who at 5 years old got saved because he wanted more out of life. He is still very, very drunk on the Kool-Aid. At least at the time of this writing, he was, and heavily involved in a national ministry. So some of them got out, but some of them did not.
Right.
And some of them, the stuff that they learned during this time in their life, they've just built on it more and more and more. And there were other things in that movie too. There was that scene with the homeschoolers, and being taught creationism, and why is creationism true and why is evolution not true, and the attitude on this mother, and the way that she was justifying the way that she was teaching her kids. Even being on the cusp, and that's why I say if you're on the fence with this, you're going to realize that something's way off here.
Yeah.
At this point, you're gonna realize that something is very, very off with the way these people think. And the more I recount this, the more it starts boiling my blood. I'm probably going to steer a little bit away from it, but I do want to say this: when it comes to being a child and being shoved into this kind of indoctrination, into this kind of mindset that's going to follow you into adulthood. And I'm going to close out what I have to say with this. Usually, I'm not going to do the whole turn to the audience thing, because we're talking about children at this point. And hopefully as adults, we've learned to think a little bit better. And if you're listening to this podcast, obviously you think that there are other things to think about. So rather than aim it right at the audience, this time around, I'm going to aim it more at me and give you just a couple of parting thoughts on this whole thing of wanting more out of life. Even if I had still been in the thick of it, it might have alarmed me to hear somebody saying that at 5 years old he wanted more out of life. Because I can understand someone accepting Jesus at mom's knee because mom says that it's a good thing to do. I can't even begin to imagine the levels of indoctrination involved in, I got saved when I was 5 because I wanted more out of life. So here are my parting thoughts on this. When I was 5, getting more out of life meant that one of the kids at Head Start gave me half of her PB&J, okay? Or that I got the last green flavor ice while I listened to a record of Peter and the Wolf. I wasn't into orange then, I was into green. It meant seeing a movie for the first time or going to a relative's house for Thanksgiving. It meant having your first McDonald's cheeseburger and a milkshake and dipping the fries in the milkshake. These were the things that gave you more out of life, the new things, the things that you hadn't experienced before, that built on what you already had, the structure of your life already. It was the first time you saw a frog hop out from under Nana's porch, or spun out on your big wheel pretending to be Evel Knievel. This is what more out of life looked like for me when I was 5. What more does anyone want of life at age 5 unless someone is telling them that their lives are somehow incomplete? And what kind of monster puts it in a child's mind that his life is incomplete before he even sets foot in kindergarten?
Yeah.
Curricula for age birth to 36 months. I've said it so many times during this episode, but it infuriates me that this is a thing. The only way that you think that you need to get more out of life is if you've got someone in your life telling you that your life is empty when you're 5.
Yeah.
It's sick. It is the epitome of child abuse. And I don't want to attack evangelical parents for teaching their kids this way, because I understand, and I will talk to the audience for just a second here. I don't want to insult anyone who brought their kids up this way because they didn't understand that it was harmful. I don't think that anyone actively engages in child abuse when they're indoctrinating their kids, but it is still child abuse, because you are forcing kids to think about things in certain ways that they shouldn't have to think about when they're 5. They should be thinking about milkshakes and big wheels when they're 5. They shouldn't be thinking about what's missing from their lives. And if you're 5 years old and you want more out of life, then shame on any adult that ever taught you that you should. Because things at that age build on each other, and they build naturally, or they should. The only things that should be crammed into your brain when you're 5 are A, B, C, and 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
That's it. Anything having to do with anything bigger than you can wait until you are big enough to handle thinking about it on your own. One more quick quote here that I got from the same article, and I'm going to close out with this. According to child psychologist Valerie Tirico, an outspoken critic of evangelical culture, many children of evangelical upbringing don't turn out so well. One of the problems with faith-based teaching is that it teaches children not to trust their own reason and intuition, undermining their ability to have confidence in their own knowledge and ability to process information. There is a lot of psychological damage that follows when people are trained not to trust themselves. And that's precisely what Christianity is. Your life is unmanageable. You need to give it to Jesus.
Yeah.
Don't trust yourself. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. Acknowledge the Lord in all of your ways, and straight will he make your path.
Yeah.
Bullshit. You have a brain. You have a life. Start using both and start getting yourself unbound. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Unbound. Show topics are chosen based on their timeliness, relevance, and social impact. Have suggestions for future topics? Email us at unbound.podcast.network@gmail.com with all your comments and feedback. Please don't forget to like, share, and throw a few 5-star ratings our way, and follow us on all major social platforms. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Links to our social pages, as well as a full list of cited sources in today's episode, are listed in the show notes, available at our website, getunbound.org. That's get-unbound.org. If you value this resource and would like to see it continue, please consider supporting us on Patreon at the link in the show description. And be sure to check for new updates every Sunday when we'll come together again and take one more step toward getting and staying unbound.